library. It was pressing up against the pedestrian bridge, threatening its structure, so they cut it down. This tree was pretty old, about 100 years. It's a lot of the history that we're going to talk about tonight, and a lot more that we will never, ever know. All we're going to perform tonight is a very small piece on a very large piece of Boulder history. A Boulder history in its nearness. For example, when they broke ground and dug the hole that became this theater on January 25th, 2005. These last rings here right below the bark. And this performance is about history in its farness. The history that happened long ago when this tree was just a sapling growing by the creek and other large trees ruled the canopy. And before this type of willow tree was even found in this region, and instead native trees, ponderosa pines and cottonwoods, and native peoples dominated the region. And this performance is a bit about the history that happened once upon a time. That history we love to celebrate that never really happened that way. Places, places! So this performance is about everything that is past, is dust, is dirt, is dead, is trash, is compost out of which the future rises. It started back in 2005 from a rock in my shoe, a broken piece of a boulder, something that kept irritating me when I was reading about yet another hate crime story in the paper, and listening to my friends at Naropa and CU talk about their experiences of racism in the community, and wondering what this has to do with me. I mean, why is racism happening in Boulder? And how am I actually accountable to what is happening around me? How am I accountable to history in its nearness and in its farness? And of course, being a Naropa alum, I thought it was important to ask the good, engaged Buddhist question, how can I be more skillful in the present moment to create a more equitable and enlightened society? And therefore, this piece has a lot to do with you as well as me. The direction we choose, the aim of our lives. It has a lot to do with arrows. To help me with this exploration are some members of the CU, Naropa, Boulder, and Denver communities. Film footage of the Boulder Creek shot by Rebecca West. So much of Boulder history literally runs along this stream. Historic newspapers, books on history, slides, and some interviews that I conducted with local historians.
My name is Modupe Labode, and I'm working as the chief historian at the Colorado Historical Society. But in this interview, I'll be expressing my opinions, as opposed to the opinions of the CHS.
Modupe Labode has a doctorate in history from Oxford.
Why I got into history? Oh my God.
That's Judy Mativi Morley. She has a PhD specializing in Western history from the University of New Mexico and teaches at the University of Colorado at Denver.
When I publish, I use Mativi. I don't use it in everyday conversation because it's a mouthful, but any articles I've written in both my books have Mativi.
Researching the book during the time that I was on the Boulder City Council was a tremendous educational experience because so many themes in Boulder's history are still the themes today.
So many themes in Boulder's history are still the themes today.
And this is Dan Corson, a local Boulder historian. He and a colleague, Tom Noel, wrote that book, Boulder County and Illustrated History. And that's Thanissaro Bhikkhu, the abbot of the Metaphorist Monastery. He's out in California, so I interviewed him over the phone about skillful means in relationship to past and to present.
Hello?
The issues of karma are so complex.
He said the issues of karma are so complex.
Part of the reason I got interested in history was I think all people ask why. Why? Why is something this way? And I saw history as a way to get access to that why. I don't think it answers very much because, I just don't. I resist the idea of having a conclusion in history that this is the way it actually was. I do think there are some elements of truth that a historian has a responsibility to uncover and acknowledge. But I also think that any illusion that you can have the whole, that somehow you can go back and get a whole very stable piece, is a fantasy. No more than how we can have a whole piece right now.
Cut!
That's Pearl and 13th Street in 1866, just 7 years after Boulder was founded. That is the same corner about 12 years later. This is a picture of Leopold de Backer's home at 75th and Arapahoe in the early 1860s. The de Backer family still live in Boulder. That's looking northwest from 14th and Walnut in 1876. This is CU in 1886, taken from 9th Street.
CU at that time consisted of Old Main and the President's House. CU had been founded just 12 years earlier, and the fact that Boulder got CU instead of the state penitentiary,
Yes, that was second prize.
was credited to the political maneuverings of David Nichols, Boulder County Territorial Legislature.
Slide. That's the junction of Broadway and 14th looking southwest. This is looking northwest from the old courthouse in the 1880s. That big building on the bottom right in the foreground is the lumberyard and mill that became the site of the Boulderado Hotel in 1909. That's Mapleton Avenue in 1895. Notice the new maple saplings. That's a panorama of Boulder and University campus in 1894. Sunset Hill at Bluff and 19th in 1925. That is just down the hill at Pearl and 11th in the 1890s, where old Chicago is now. These photos reveal a radically different landscape than appeared to the native peoples for hundreds and even thousands of years. Before 1859, there was no town. The Euro-Americans who came through just kept moving. Then 4 months after the Aikens Party lands in Boulder, just 4 months, there is a town, plots of land sold, and we have Boulder City. So to begin with, Modupe, could you tell us whose land this was before it became Boulder?
Well, on one level, Niwot, or Left Hand as he was also called, was there when these gold seekers came.
Could one of the actors please come out and play Niwot and all in white so we can project on you?
Most people in Boulder know Chief Niwot through his legendary curse on the Boulder Valley.
People, seeing the beauty of this valley, will want to stay. And their staying will be the undoing of the beauty.
Research, did Niwot actually say that?
Let
No.
me see. No. Niwot was one of the peace chiefs of the Southern Arapaho. There are no pictures of him, but he was described by Mrs. Julia Lambert, a writer at that time, as
one of the finest looking Indians I've ever seen. Over 6 feet tall with a muscular build. He looked every inch a chief.
All right, cut on Lambert, thank you.
Niwot became a chief of his band in part because he spoke English. His older sister had married John Poisel, a white trader, and that allowed him to communicate directly with the American leaders.
So Modupe, if you were saying in recent times, would you say this is Arapaho land?
Well, we know that the Arapaho and Ute were in huge conflicts, and the Ute were all over here. And the Arapaho came in a little bit later, so it probably was Ute land before that. But anyone could categorically say it's American Indian lands, but which nation?
The 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie promises the Arapaho and the Cheyenne Indians the land north of the Arkansas River and east of the Rocky Mountains.
I was at this treaty signing. I was not a chief at this time, so I did not sit in circle with the Americans, but I had almost all of their words in my mouth, for I translated for our people, as well as for the Cheyenne. And I saw the Americans make the mark that promised this land.
Research this land?
Yes.
And all of Boulder County.
To our people, forever.
These are two Arapaho boys, sons of Sharpnose, who posed for this photo at the end of the 19th century.
Things changed dramatically in this region when in July of 1858, gold was discovered at Cherry Creek, near where downtown Denver is today.
Gold!
This sparks the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, which brings an estimated 100,000 fortune hunters to the Rockies under the banner Pikes Peak or Bust.
Every white person in the world must be crossing through here. Our hunting grounds have been depleted.
If you look closely at the boys' arms and ribs, you can see the landscape of their battle with hunger.
It was Niwot's band of Southern Arapaho that were returning to their winter camp along the Boulder Creek when they discovered a group of 15 prospectors led by
Captain Thomas A. Akins.
That's Boulder's founder, Thomas Akins.
The Akins party had come from out east, many from Maryland, following the gold rush, and arrived in the Boulder area in October of 1858.
Gold!
Niwot told the Akins party in English to their astonishment.
Go away. You come to kill our game, burn our wood, and destroy our grass.
The Akins party promised Niwot they were not planning on settling, but would leave for the mountains in the spring to search for gold.
Gold!
Some of Niwot's warriors, perceiving possible danger from these trespassers, encouraged an attack. But Niwot had seen other bands who came in conflict with the whites hunted to extinction. So for the good of his whole band, he chose to stand up against the angered warriors and assured the Akins party their safety.
The 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie promises the Arapaho and the Cheyenne Indians the land north of the Arkansas River and east of the Rocky Mountains.
When the white settlers came and set up what was at first a camp at Boulder Creek, it was really a day-by-day decision.
They cannot take the winter, and they will leave.
Do Niwot and his band make war on these people in order to get them out?
They will stay only one season.
Well, you know, Niwot had seen more and more people pass through here.
They will leave. They promised that they would leave in the spring.
Rather than risk war, it's kind of an appeasement policy.
We barely have enough warriors to hunt. If we attack these people, it could bring the entire cavalry of Denver down on us. And they promised that they would leave.
On January 16th, 1859, the Akins party discovers gold in Gold Run near Gold Hill.
Gold!
They never leave. Instead, on February 10th, 1859, just 4 months after arriving at the creek, the Akins party founds the Boulder City Town Company. And within a few weeks, the one-time camp of 11 cabins expanded to 70 permanent dwellings spread along today's Pearl Street.
That's a drawing of Boulder just 17 years after the town was founded, a place that is already recognizable as the place we live today. The city council even named Arapaho Street Not Yet Avenue in 1859.
Then pretty soon more white settlers come. The town gets bigger. Now Niwot has a different set of decisions to make because now the Arapaho are totally overpowered.
Do I join together with Hosa and the other tribes from the south to try to force them out?
That's Hosa, principal chief of the Southern Arapaho.
Do I try and speak with their leaders again to have our treaty honored?
And for Niwot, it's accommodation after accommodation after accommodation.
Colorado's early settlement in the 1860s and 70s was accompanied by increasing intolerance for those who were different. It was around the time of Manifest Destiny, so there's an idea that white Americans, white Christian Americans, should dominate the land and its people. Those who couldn't get with that idea did not deserve to be on the land. It's kind of scary to read about the celebration of homicides to solve problems in the 1860s, largely saying the Ute must go, the Arapaho must go, the Cheyenne must go. And when people said that, they weren't saying that they should move. It meant that they should be killed.
I asked the historians how Aikens could establish a town on land that by United States treaty belonged to the Arapaho and Cheyenne.
The 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie promises the Arapaho and the Cheyenne Indians the land north of the Arkansas River and east of the Rocky Mountains.
Judy, was there some kind of legal process?
Well, yes and no. Yes, there was a process. You could stake a claim. And there were exceptions to the Treaty of Fort Laramie. I mean, you could find exceptions to the treaty. One famous one here in Denver. The founders of the Denver City Town Company got this old mountain man named William McGaw, who was married to a Cheyenne woman, and made him one of the investors in the town company. Well, by United States law, anything that belongs to the wife belongs to the husband. She was a member of the Cheyenne tribe, so she automatically gave her rights to that land to her husband, who then turned it over to his partners, the Denver City Town Company. Well, that's one loophole used here in Denver. Not the same loophole used in Boulder, but very similar. It was one where, well, you know, I hate to sound so obvious, but
Possession is 9/10 of the law.
So if you squat, it's yours. But of course, that's something if people did it today, you can't just go set up a tent out in a park. People would say, we're a nation of law. You can't do that.
No, Boulder Anti-Camping Ordinance, Chapter 5, Section 6, Paragraph 10.
But that's how people got the land in the so-called nonviolent land seizures. That's what people were doing.
So the site where Boulder actually sits isn't where the Arapaho and the Cheyenne really camped.
So Aikens could legally squat at the creek because
the Arapaho camped a little farther north, up by Valmont Butte.
Oh yeah, the land right above the Stasio ball field.
It's not until 1864, when Sand Creek comes, that technically the white settlers in the area are staying here illegally. Trespassers. And when the Indians, mainly in the Denver settlements, begin to rise up and protest this, Sand Creek comes. So it's kind of extra legal that Boulder is being founded up there.
Extra legal?
Yes, and really thanks to the accommodation of Niwot and his people, until the whites totally overpower and outnumber them, and, well, then you have Sand Creek.
I think at the very least, there's a responsibility for remembrance. And that's very, very difficult, because it means thinking that as you walk along the creek, or if you're looking at the mountains, saying, these mountains belonged in fairly recent times to somebody else. That part of why we're here is through colonialism or manifest destiny, even though you or I or somebody walking down the street might feel completely innocent of that. We are historical products in many ways.
Hello?
The issues of karma are so complex. Reflect on the fact that all who are born into the human race have unskillful karma. So, as you're meditating, realize that you're not doing this just for yourself. You're doing it for the good of the world. And you want to do it well, so it can be helpful for other people, too.
People were forcibly erased and forced to move. And there was violence that was part of that. And we don't want to think about that because it hurts. But I think having some of that pain or that kind of, it's like having a rock in your shoe in this case. We're speaking English here as opposed to any other language.
Cut.
No one knows historically why at Boulder's first city council meeting, they set forth a list of land use regulations unheard of for a rugged western settlement. I mean, absolutely unheard of. They determined at that time that cabin walls had to be higher than 8 1/2 feet, with chimneys on the inside of the cabins to avoid that raw, half-finished look of other frontier towns. Boulder required that cabin foundations be built within 7 days.
And on the seventh day he rested.
With the entire cabin completed within 60 days, cabins were to be oriented north-south in orderly rows along the public streets. They sold the lots for $1,000.
$1,000?
Yes, a lot of money in 1859 when in Denver they were giving it away.
Why?
Because they wanted to attract a certain type of population, and it has continued to do so since that day. It does create a certain type of community.
This is a picture by the famous photographer Edward Curtis. It's called Arapaho Maiden.
Although Niwot had moved his camp 15 miles north to St. Vrain in order to prevent clashes with the new towns, trouble comes anyway. It's at St. Vrain on April 14, 1860, that a man named Charles Gardner led a group of drunken whites from Denver to the Arapaho camp.
If we do not hunt, we cannot feed our people. But if the warriors leave the camp...
I really love the late 19th century, but I just find it all so appalling too. You know, when I read old newspapers, the racism that just drips from them and this real hostility. I had an intern looking at some newspapers and he came across the account in the Rocky Mountain News of April 18, 1860.
The account was a letter to the editor from the famous African-American scout, trapper James P. Beckwourth.
After dark, a lot of drunk devils and bummers went into the lodges, took the Indian women and girls forcibly out, committing acts of violence which in any other country would condemn the perpetrators to ignominy and shame. Age was not respected. The gray hairs on John Poiso's old Indian wife.
That's Niwot's sister.
Could not protect her.
Which, as I explained some of the Victorian language to the intern, was essentially detailing a mass rape.
This rape would probably have included Niwot's wife and 10-year-old daughter.
The leader of the attack, Gardner, was well known to the Arapaho. He was a big man who had escaped the Philadelphia prison. He had married one Arapaho and then eaten her during a winter blizzard, earning the nickname in Denver of Big Phil the Cannibal.
We return from a successful hunt to find women who will no longer eat.
This is a picture of Beckwourth, a man trusted by the Arapaho to help them negotiate with the authorities in Denver.
There are no images of the perpetrators.
Why has this sexual and racial violence been obscured?
Even after the attack on the Arapaho women, Niwot refused to let his young men fight the whites. He decided instead to test the Denver criminal justice system.
I cannot let my warriors attack. I cannot even let them kill the cannibal. Denver would use even the cannibal as an excuse to make war with us. I will not give them that. I have 80 warriors left, 80. They have 2,000 with guns, and they're just waiting for an excuse. We will not be taken down because wild dogs have destroyed our camp. For the good of my people, my wife, I cannot raise an arrow. Beckwourth has come to join our cries. He says that the people of Denver will hang the cannibal and all of the others.
The Indians are as keenly sensible to acts of injustice as they are tenacious of revenge. And it is more humiliating to them to be recipients of such treatment upon their own lands, which they have been deprived of, their game driven off, forced to suffer by hunger, abused more than dogs. My advice is that municipal regulations be made preventing the sale of intoxicating drinks to them. And all immigrants on their way here ought to most religiously refrain from giving the Indians whiskey or trading it to them for their horses.
How can we deal with the fact that when the city of Denver met to discuss this, it turned into, instead of talking about rape, it turned into, don't give Indians alcohol, they just do crazy stuff. It was completely ignoring the issue.
The court dismissed the case against Gardner.
How do we deal with this kind of thing in history? If I went to give a talk to, a group of people who are interested in cowboys, Indians, and trains, they couldn't hear it because it would go so counter to what they thought about the founding of Denver. It would turn into, well, I heard that so-and-so was raped by a Ute man, or I heard, So it gets tit for tat instead of acknowledging the pain of the actions themselves. What I do is so incremental. I try to get people to think that history is more than the good old days. I don't want to have people just be miserable, because people will tune out. But there has to be something, to be some way.
Even though the court dismissed the case against Gardner, Niwot kept trying to work within the American governing system.
I tried so many ways of getting the whites to see that the Arapaho could live with them. I took 2 of my warriors to a cabin where the Denver people vote, and I asked for our ballots. They just stuttered for a while, talking about Indian land not being subject to taxation. All of this land is ours.
This is Denver around this time. It's the early 1860s.
The mass rape at the Arapaho camp gave me a better understanding of why some groups were extremely hostile. The so-called peace chiefs a lot of times were like, man, if you're going to rape my grandmother, you can do anything. You're a monster. There's no hope dealing with you.
Many times, I went to the Rocky Mountain News to protest how my people were being portrayed.
Once the editor, Byers,
That's William Byers.
investigated Niwot's complaint that his warriors had been falsely accused of attacking the Adams homestead, the editor discovered
the Indians killed no ox in the neighborhood nor committed any other outrage. Story appears to be fabricated for insurance purposes.
That's the Rocky Mountain News from around this time period.
early 1860s.
Then there was the time that Black Kettle and I used our own ponies to purchase white hostages from some Cheyenne. I myself rode to Fort Lyon with one of these women on my horse.
That's Laura Roper, who was 17 at the time of her abduction.
We had to show their new leader, Winecoop, that we want peace. We are working for peace. As I slipped her off of my horse, they raised their guns to shoot.
Niwot's biographer, Margaret Cole, points out, for an Indian to ride into a white camp with a white teenage girl on his pony and give himself over as a hostage, as Niwot did, was an act of stunning courage.
I went to see a play in Denver. It was powerful, seeing all the whites sitting around me in the dark, quiet, listening. It is so difficult for them to let their tongues settle into their mouths. After the performance, I came up onto the stage to talk about the peaceful intentions of my people and how we could learn to live together.
That's a picture of the theater from around this time. It's the Apollo Theater in Denver on Larimer Street.
The play showing that night was The Lady of Lyons. It was written by Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton, best known for the infamous cliche,
It was a dark and stormy night.
Theater!
I wrote about left-hand speech in the Rocky Mountain News, April 30th, 1861. Let me translate.
I speak
The chief
English.
said that his tribe still retained their usual and long-standing good feelings toward the whites, and that under no circumstances will it injure or molest the whites. He warned us that the Cheyenne
I speak Cheyenne.
are disposed to be troublesome and fears there will be difficulty. He advises conciliation and every effort to restrain impulsive demonstration against the Cheyenne. He says that the present problem has been brought about mainly by a misunderstanding.
I also speak the language of the Sioux.
He much worries that in the event of trouble, his people will be mistaken for the Cheyenne, as many of the whites cannot distinguish between them.
I told my white brethren, stop talking about making war with my people. We look upon the white men as brothers.
He thinks that all trouble can be avoided if no assaults or wrongs are imposed upon the Indian.
You have come to hunt for gold. hunt for gold, and leave the Indian alone.
The plot of The Lady of Lyons is a standard Victorian melodrama.
Playwright Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton believed that art should be idealized, that realism was not only bad art, but also bad moral teaching.
The last line spoken in the play that night was,
"He who seeks repentance for the past should woo the angel virtue in the future."
4 years later, with increasing Indian raids threatening Denver, Byers writes in regards to the surrounding Indian tribes.
A few months of active extermination against the Red Devils will bring quiet, and nothing else will.
Cut! So in honor of Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton's idea that art should be idealized and realism is bad art, what is the idealized version of Colorado history? What, for example, is the history that people come into the Colorado History Museum wanting to see? The history they actually clap for. Places, please, places. History we want to celebrate, take one. Thank you. History we want to celebrate, take one.
History we want to celebrate? We want to talk about American Indians and essentialize them, to see them as noble people who somehow just went away.
All these statues are located around the Denver Capitol building. This statue is closing era statue.
And right next to that is this real celebration of pioneers, those settlers who came here first.
This statue is called Bronco Buster.
And seldom is
That's the Pioneer Monument, an image of Kit Carson on horseback at the top with figures of a prospector, a hunter, and a rifle-toting pioneer mother with her infant below.
I should add that in the original 1911 version, there was no Kit Carson. The sculptor had capped the monument with an heroic Native American figure, but the people of Denver were outraged, so the sculptor replaced the Indian with Kit Carson.
As for Boulder, I've been looking at statues around here, but I haven't noticed any settlers or cowboys. There was a train. There is a miner. There are a couple of Niwot sculptures.
And the one by the courthouse does reference to the Sand Creek massacre.
But most of the statues I've seen around here, besides the buffalo, of course, that are everywhere, are the ones down on the Pearl Street Mall of different wild animals.
People love stories about animals.
1870. American hunters begin moving into the plains, killing buffalo at a rate of 3 million per year.
Especially animals like bison, big animals, cougars, elk, lynx, even though those animals in themselves create a lot of ambivalence.
1893. Fewer than 2,000 buffalo remain of the more than 20 million.
You know, what do you do when there's a cougar walking right down your main street? Or what do you do when the elk have taken up residence in your backyard?
1913. The U.S. Mint issues the buffalo, or Indian head nickel, with an Indian's head shown in profile on the side inscribed liberty, and a buffalo on the side bearing the motto, E pluribus unum, or from many, one.
All right, cut. That's a take. Places for Sand Creek, please. Places for Sand Creek. The Sand Creek massacre is deeply woven into the founding of Boulder. I asked Modupi Labode why we should remember this disturbing history. I mean, people have worked really hard at erasing it. So Modupi, why bring it back?
I want to have a commitment to living, and to living more honestly. And part of that means acknowledging that I am a part of other processes, some of which I voluntarily participate in, others that I'm born into. And just because you're born into it doesn't make you innocent or pure. I think for me, again, it's that why question. Why are things the way they are? In the US, the dominant paradigm is very much let's forget about it. When people talk about history, they say, that's history, as a term of dismissing things, instead of saying, that is history, and we're not able to do much about it, except remember it.
Could you tell us what happened at Sand Creek?
Well, initially, kind of the short version is that there had been increasing hostilities between the Plains Indians, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho, and the U.S. military. 1864 had been particularly dangerous and deadly.
My warriors would not listen to me. Our children were hungry. They stole horses. I left my own camp in protest, but it was not my men who were killing whites. It was not my men. We want peace, but my people are starving, and the government will not honor its treaty. Instead, the whites search the plains and kill every Indian they see.
I guess, in order to be balanced, you can try to put yourself in the position of the white settlers who felt isolated and under attack. The Arapaho and the Cheyenne had been disrupting the trade routes. Denver is really isolated. It's 1,000 miles from the nearest town, and in the days before the railroad, you depended on the wagon train for everything. Food, supplies, flour, and if the Arapaho and the Cheyenne had burned everything somewhere outside Oklahoma or Nebraska, nothing comes, which makes you jittery. Then you're isolated. The army can't get through. You're kind of on your own.
Excuse me. I know we're jumping into 1864 and Sand Creek, but before we go any further, I do think it's important to note that as early as 1863, Denver's territorial governor, John Evans, had been informed by the U.S. attorney in Denver that he had a problem with land rights.
Legally, all lands north and west of the South Platte still belong by treaty to the Arapaho and Cheyenne. Let us be clear. Denver, Boulder, and the richest gold districts are officially off limits.
Go! It all culminated in June of '64 when the bodies of the Hungate family, a man, a wife, and 2 little girls, have been found on their isolated ranch out near Elizabeth, Colorado, and they had been, slaughtered. One little girl's throat had been slit so far that her head had almost been taken off. And these bodies were brought to Denver and displayed and riled everyone on. Got that mob mentality going.
Those that perpetrate such a natural, brutal butchery such as this ought to be hunted to the farthest bounds of these broad plains and burned at the stake alive.
The Commonwealth, a Denver paper, June 15th, 1864.
So in a balanced portrayal, you can really understand the fear that's going through the white settlers of Denver. They feel like they're under siege. They have, proof in front of their eyes that Indians will murder whites, and not just white army soldiers, but women and children as well. And there's panic.
A few days after the Hungate murder, a rancher rode into Denver.
Indians are coming! Indians are coming! Hurry your wives and children to safety! They're gonna try and burn this city down! They're gonna kill us all!
Women grabbed their children and ran out of their homes, leaving doors flapping open and curtains moving eerily in the breeze. Men herded everyone inside the sturdiest buildings and stood with guns and axes waiting until around midnight when scouts came back to report,
"There are no Indians anywhere near Denver. Come on out, everyone. Go on home. Go on home."
On August 11th, 1864, Governor Evans issues a proclamation.
All citizens of Colorado, either individually or in such parties as they may organize, are authorized to go in pursuit of all hostile Indians on the plains.
I went in search of Black Kettle, the great Cheyenne chief who wants peace as much as we do. We gathered together chiefs from the surrounding bands, and together we wrote a letter asking to speak with the Great Father in Washington. Old Man One Eye, once a great warrior, volunteered to take our letter to Fort Lyon near Sand Creek. I myself put the folded letter into his shirt, knowing he would be shot for approaching the fort, but that they would find the letter. They always search our pockets.
This is a transformative moment in Margaret Cole's book. You see, when One Eye approaches Fort Lyon, waving the letter, the sergeant disobeys fort policy and instead captures him and takes One Eye to the commander, Major Winecoop.
That's Winecoop on his knee on the left.
And well, Winecoop's attitude towards the Indians at this time was similar to those of other leading men in the territory.
The Indian has no rights that we are bound to respect. He is degraded, cruel, treacherous, with the instincts of a wild beast, and should be treated accordingly. Smith!
Winecoop interrogates One Eye with the help of interpreter John Smith.
Did you not know that any Indian coming within range of this fort was certain to be killed?
I knew it, but in all hours of the day or night, in the bitter cold weather and in the storm, our women, our children are scattered throughout the prairies. Fearing the approach of your troops, they fall down and die. There is mourning throughout our entire nation. If the great father in Washington had any idea how much his red children were suffering, he'd stretch forth his hands and tell his soldiers to stop.
Did you not fear that you would be killed when you endeavored to get into this fort?
I thought that I would be killed, but that the paper would be found upon my dead body, that you would see it, and it would give peace to my people once more.
The bravery of One Eye so contradicts Winecoop's perceptions about Indian people that he listens deeply to One Eye, and from this moment forward is an advocate for the peace chiefs. Winecoop takes them to Denver, sure that Governor Evans and Colonel Shivington will broker a peace after sitting down and truly listening to these chiefs like he did. That's a picture of the wagons carrying the Indian delegation in Denver.
14th Street between Lawrence and Larimer. Governor Evans' brick home is on the left. It's September of 1864.
I did not go to meet with the Denver chiefs. I sent my brother, Neva, so that I could stay in the camp and keep the peace. One mistake from my warriors could ruin everything. I could not let one man participate in a raid and jeopardize all of our efforts, but it is difficult not to succumb to the cries of our hungry children.
That's the peace negotiation in Denver. That man is the famous Cheyenne chief, Black Kettle. That's his brother, who is also a chief, White Antelope. And that's Neva, Niwot's brother.
Well, Governor Evans told the peace chiefs, okay, if you are not the bands that are disrupting the wagon trains, killing the Hungates, or raiding settlements,
we need you to go down to Sand Creek by Fort Lyon and camp there under a white flag.
My rule of fighting white men or Indians is to fight them until they lay down their arms and submit to military authority. Go to Major Winecoop at Fort Lyon.
That was Colonel Shivington, commander of the Military District of Colorado, speaking at the peace negotiations in Denver.
So Neva, White Antelope, and Black Kettle,
thinking they would be under U.S. government protection,
go down there by the banks of Sand Creek by Fort Lyon.
October 17th, 1864, Major Winecoop is removed from Fort Lyon to explain his friendly dealings with the Indians.
That's about a month before the attack on Sand Creek.
The new commander, Major Anthony, insists that the Indians turn over all their weapons.
I asked Major Anthony if my men could keep their bows and arrows to hunt jackrabbits and dogs for food.
Request denied!
I signaled my warriors to drop their bows. But then I spoke to the white leaders, loud and in English, so that every white man on the field could understand. We, the Arapaho, submit to this because we will be brothers in peace. So kill me if you wish, imprison me, but I will not fight you. I will not.
The investigation of the Sand Creek massacre. Congressional testimony of United States Indian interpreter Mr. John S. Smith.
That's him, top row on the left, third from the left.
Washington, March 14th, 1865, under the examination of Mr. Gooch.
According to Colonel John Chivington's testimony, the men under his command included 750 of Colorado's mounted cavalry with rifled muskets and the 100-day volunteers. How many Indians were there?
Around 500.
500. Men, women, and children?
Yes, sir. I think that probably there might have been 60 or 70 warriors who were armed and stood their ground and fought.
Will you state for the committee all you know in relation to Colonel Chivington's attack upon the Cheyenne and Arapaho in November last?
On the morning of the 27th, near sunrise and daybreak, a large number of troops were discovered a mile below the village. The Indians who discovered them ran to my camp and wanted me to go see what troops they were and what they wanted. Black Kettle, head chief of the Cheyenne, was encamped there with us. Some years previous, he had been presented with a fine American flag by Colonel Greenwood. Black Kettle ran this American flag up to the top of his lodge with a small white flag tied underneath it, as he had been advised to do in case he should meet with any troops out on the prairies.
These flag photos were taken by Ray Ramirez of the Native American Rights Fund at the Sand Creek Memorial dedication in 2007.
People from Denver and Boulder signed up now for this little Indian war. The men enlisted for 90 days. After some 86 days, they hadn't found any renegade Indians. So Chivington comes to the conclusion that these renegades must have re-assimilated into the supposedly peaceful bands that were camped at Sand Creek. You can see, if you were really trying to be balanced, that this is just a misunderstanding of epic proportions.
Do you know if Colonel Chivington was aware of the friendly character of these Indians?
It is in my opinion that he was. He was told there were no Indians in the vicinity of Fort Lyon, except for Black Kettle's band of Cheyennes and Left Hand's band of Arapahoes.
Had there been any hostile act or demonstration on the part of these Indians?
Not in this band.
Do you know the reason for the attack on the Indians?
I do not know any exact reason. I have been told that this whole Indian war was brought about for selfish purposes. Colonel Chivington was running for Congress in Colorado, and it is my understanding that he had this war in view to retain himself and his troops in that country to carry out his electioneering purposes.
Major Winecoop's lieutenants are still at Fort Lyon, and they try to stop Chivington.
Colonel Chivington, we cannot attack these Indians. It would be murder. The men and I that have served at Fort Lyon have an obligation to house these Indians. Major Winecoop pledged his word as an officer and as a man to them, and all of the officers under him are thus indirectly pledged as well. You cannot ask us to fight the very same Indians that saved our lives, as we all feel they have. You cannot! You cannot!
I believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians that would kill women and children. And damn any man here in sympathy with the Indians. Such men as Major Niwot had better get out of the United States service!
It's the fight itself that really throws this balanced portrayal out the window, because when the first cannons fire on Sand Creek, all the chiefs come running out, carrying American flags and white flags.
George Benn testified that Black Kettle stood holding the flagpole and called on the screaming women and children to gather under it, but that when the soldiers finally got within 50 yards, they opened fire. Reports differ on the death of Cheyenne Chief White Antelope. One witness said he joined his brother Black Kettle under the flag, and then, when the shots began, he screamed for his people to run as he yelled at the soldiers to stop. He then returned to his teepee and came out firing until he was shot down. In George Benn's testimony, on the other hand, he mentions no gun, but that White Antelope, seeing his people falling at his feet, chose not to leave the dying, but stood there, his hands folded at his breast, singing his death song until he too was shot down. Reports say that Chief Niwot, although seriously ill at the time, ran towards the charging troops with his palms outstretched in a sign of peace. But he was shot down despite his pleas in clear English. Another member of Boulder's Company D at Sand Creek reported hearing an Indian yell at him in English,
"Come on, you damn white sons of bitches! Kill me if you're a brave man!"
That Indian was thought by some historians to be George Bent.
That's George Bent and his wife. George Bent was the son of William Bent, an owl woman.
There's a couple of letters. 2 officers who held fire. They didn't allow their soldiers to participate because they said this was a massacre. This was, I'm a soldier. I fight, not kill people. And in some of the letters that the soldiers wrote back, they talk about some of the ways in which the genitals were taken, in which children were killed, and so on. So it's kind of interesting how initially some people have just said, oh, it was all just oral history, meaning that it came from American Indians, therefore it's suspect. But it was kind of interesting how people haven't been able to argue that when you had soldiers of the U.S. Army saying this was completely unmilitary activity.
Were the women and children slaughtered indiscriminately, or only so far as they were with the warriors?
Indiscriminately.
Were there any acts of barbarity perpetrated?
Yes, sir. I saw the bodies of those lying there all cut to pieces. Worse mutilated than any I ever saw. The women cut all to pieces.
How cut?
With knives, scalped, their brains bashed out. Children, 2 or 3 months old.
Did you see them when they were mutilated?
Yes, sir.
By whom were they mutilated?
The United States troops.
Commanding Officer Colonel Shivington's perspective was,
kill and scalp all Indians, little and big. Knits make lice.
So it's at that moment that all the balance flies out the window. Shivington initially said, oh, there were some 500 warriors there. We defeated in a valiant battle. But what I find amazing about Sand Creek is this is November of 1864. We are in the middle of the Civil War. Sherman has just marched from Atlanta to the sea. Grant is bogged down out there outside Washington, D.C., losing 1,000 men a day in the Civil War. And in this, Abraham Lincoln stops Congress and calls a congressional investigation into Sand Creek. So even the whites of the time recognized that this was an atrocity. One man who refused to fight was arrested because he, shirked his duty. He refused to fight. His name was Captain Silas Soule.
That was Silas Soule, the man right there on his knee next to Wine Coop. According to the men on the field, he actually begged Shivington, a friend and fellow abolitionist, to stop the assault. And when Shivington rallied his troops forward...
Fire! Stop! Stop!
Get him, boys!
Silas Soule disobeyed military authority and ordered his men...
Don't move!
This allowed some of the Cheyenne and Arapaho to escape.
When Soule got back to Denver, he stood up to threats and agreed to testify against Shivington for the congressional inquiry.
3 attempts were made on Soule's life before he was finally gunned down in the streets of Denver.
Many of the participants in the massacre are some of the founders of Boulder, Denver, other places. The Colorado Historical Society has a house that was owned by the Evans family. And the Evans family later became, over generations, one of the most powerful and wealthiest in Denver.
Company D included Boulder's original founders who were first welcomed by Niwot: Thomas Akins, Fred Squires, and A.A. Brookfield, who also became Boulder's first mayor, as well as Marinus Smith, the man who donated most of the original land for CU. The leader of Company D, David Nichols, the man credited with getting CU for Boulder, boasted that it was he that had brought down the great Chief Niwot.
Company D did not include Niwot's friends in Boulder like Bob Hawke, who prayed that Niwot had somehow escaped.
At an exhibit on Sand Creek at the Boulder History Museum, it talked in detail about the mutilations at Sand Creek. The Colorado volunteers went back to Sand Creek the day after the massacre and cut off toes, fingers, scalps, ears. They cut off women's breasts and men and women's genitals and tied them to their saddles.
They cut off White Antelope's nose and ears, and then he was scalped and castrated.
They went back the next day and completed the mutilations the next day.
Following a performance at the Denver Opera House a few days after the massacre, members of the 3rd Colorado Regiment jumped up on stage, parading their Indian scalps as the audience cheered.
When Colonel Shivington was asked about the mutilations, he said,
"The soldiers were simply obtaining trophies to preserve as reminiscences to bequeath to their children of the glorious field of Sand Creek."
But what I find amazing, now, Colonel Shivington was a Mason. He belonged to the Masons chapter of the Union Lodge here in Denver. About 4 months ago, I was asked to give a keynote talk on the founding of Denver to the Masons. And I gave basically the same talk I just gave you. The outrage of some of these men that I would assume that Shivington had acted inappropriately. The man was, after all, a Methodist minister. How could I assume that he would commit this atrocity? Oh, and remember, the Indians were at fault too.
In Colorado, there's alternative historiography that's kind of grown up. That there were warriors in the camp, that it wasn't a massacre, that it was a full-fledged battle. That in some ways the Indians deserved what they got. This has been a very active scar, a very active, painful thing.
The people who are still members of the Masons Lodge are descendants of the founding fathers of Denver. To make it look as if Shivington were wrong would make it look as if their ancestors were wrong.
So Judy, there you are, a guest speaker hired by the Masons to hopefully tell them what they want to hear, and you tell them exactly what they don't want to hear. How do you handle that type of situation?
You listen. I'm a firm believer that I can't change people's minds. People have to change their own. But maybe something I say will add something to the opposing end of the scale that might ultimately change their mind. You know, it wasn't all of them that wanted to lynch me. Just a few.
Hello?
The issues of karma are so complex. I think it was Ajahn Fuang who once said, "Insight comes down to seeing your own stupidity." You keep doing the things that you don't have to do, but they create suffering for you. And not only for you, but also for the people around you. And you keep on doing it again and again and again. That's the definition of stupidity. We don't like to think of ourselves as stupid, but we are. When you finally develop the equanimity to admit your stupidity, when you can step back and learn how to unlearn all those stupid actions, that's where insight shows its benefits. It can teach you to fashion things in a new way, a better way, so that your participation in shaping your experience, your participation in the world around you, gets more and more skillful.
1 hour in the second act to cover 100 years. So hold on to your seat. It's going to be fast.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I understand that performances have limited time frames.
Yes, they do.
But please, we are going to cover the Ute. Please.
Yes, we have to actually. Can I have a slide 103, please? I have to confess that before I started this performance research, I had never ever heard of the Ute. I kept pronouncing it Oot. Who are the Oot? Who are the Oot? I never put together Ute and Utah. The Ute were the dominant tribe in the Boulder area. And yet, where are there even references to these people? I mean, there's Arapaho Avenue. What about Ute Avenue, or Ute Way for that matter, Modupe?
It does seem that Ute history has been, there's been an effort to erase it from Colorado history.
If there's been an effort to erase it, it's certainly not part of the history we want to celebrate. Places for history we want to celebrate, you guys. Thanks. Thank you for your speed. Remember, 1 hour for 100 years of history. Thank you. History we want to celebrate. Take 2.
History we want to celebrate. We want to talk about American Indians and essentialize them, to see them as noble people who somehow just went away.
The governor of Colorado,
that's him, McCook,
was pressuring the Ute to sell their lands in the 1870s. The Ute leader, Ore,
that's him,
told the governor in August of 1872,
"We do not want to sell a foot of our land. That is the opinion of all. The government is obliged by its treaty to take care of our people, and that's all we want. For some time, we have seen the whites coming into our lands, and we have not done anything ourselves, but have waited for the government to fulfill its treaty."
And right next to this is this real celebration of pioneers, those settlers who came here first.
The refusal of the Utes to sell additional land angered the Coloradans.
The Utes would not resign the reservation, so the fairest portion of Colorado and some of the richest mining country is closed to settlement, unless it be settled by force of arms.
That's from the Boulder News, a local newspaper of the time.
People love stories about animals, especially animals like bison, big animals, cougars, elk, lynx, even though those animals in themselves create a lot of ambivalence.
So settled we believe it will be and should be. An Indian has no more right to stand in the way of civilization and progress than a wolf or a bear.
What do you do when there's a cougar walking right down your main street? Or what do you do when the elk have taken up residence in your backyard?
All right, cut. That's a take.
Take. So at the time of the founding of Boulder, most people in the West believed that the most humane policy towards Indians was extermination. There's this school of thought, we will never be able to live side by side with these people. Let's just get rid of them and our problem will be solved. We'll have the land, won't have to make warfare on either side, won't have to starve them. It's kind of like shooting the horse that's gone lame, and that way it doesn't have to suffer. We find a lot of these attitudes just horrific and barbaric, but it's one thing to look at the Balkans and see that sort of ethnic cleansing going on and go,
"Oh my God, how could this happen?"
Well, after the Ute people were moved...
Cut, we need to move on, thank you.
But there's very important information about the Ute.
Yes, I know. It's the hardest thing about trying to condense 150 years of history into a 2-hour play. So let me say again how much we are missing, even from the main strains of history in this area. What a small piece we are covering.
A very small piece.
Yes, just a piece of a piece. So much was cut. People have been coming into Colorado from Mexico since the late 16th century.
I, Don Juan Oñate, sent my men into the San Luis Valley in 1598.
Cut! I wish we had time for the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The whole western portion of Colorado was Mexico until 1848.
Patricia Limerick writes, "It is surely one of the greater paradoxes of our time that the Mexican people, so intimately tied to the history of North America, should be known to us under the label alien."
Slide. That's a black miner's residence somewhere in Colorado.
I had mines seized by whites under a law barring black men from filing a mining claim. Now the way
I would love to include this. This is a great structural discrimination story.
Well, it's just one of many. Are you sure you don't want to go?
It's just time. We have to move on. Slide. That's a Euro-American Boulder home in the 1880s.
It was very difficult for us.
Cut! This is an important story. It's just covered in mainstream Colorado history, so I had to cut it. Slide. These are Arapaho women in the 1930s.
We went to Denver as welfare workers trying to help.
Cut!
Excuse me, but this piece is not covering any history of Native Americans except genocide history.
You're right, but I only have an hour and I touched on the slide. That's a Teutonic tavern on Pearl Street. You can see German house.
It was rough, and you didn't dare talk German on the school ground, Cass.
You're not going to talk about the persecution of the Germans during the First War? Until World War I, the German people were the largest foreign group in Boulder County.
And that would have been a great counterpart to the Japanese story. Shit. Slide. Boulder County residents that I first saw in Polly McLean's book, A Legacy of Missing Pieces, The Voices of Black Women in Boulder County.
The Boulder Theater in the 1930s only allowed 13 seats in the balcony to African Americans. If 14 should happen to attend, then the 14th had to sit on the floor.
Cut.
Even if there were empty seats on the rest of the balcony.
Yes, thank you. We're going to get to some of this later on, so please slide. This is the University Hill School in 1906.
I went to University Hill School as long as I could. 8th grade. I come from a farm, see, and the kids are bigger there because we didn't go to school like they did here in Boulder. I mean, you'd husk corn late in the fall and start school after that, and then you'd quit early in the spring to help plant.
Cut.
And then we come to Boulder, and the Boulder kids only came up to my knees.
All right, cut. Thank you. Chautauqua opening.
Yeah, July 4th, 1898.
I remember the Chautauqua July 4th. That was really something. Mother had us rest up, you know, and she had a little brocade basket, a little black parasol. We came up in what you'd call a livery. There were places all along Pearl where you could hire a livery. And when we wanted to do something a little more grandly, we'd hire out what do you call them? Two people this way and two people this way.
Pastor, cut.
They were brilliant. They were stately. They were beautiful. They were leather-lined. They were lovely.
Slide.
Excuse me, but if you want to look at Boulder history through the lens of race, you're going to have to deal with class. The two cannot be separated. Perhaps I could recommend a book
Yes, it's just what's the best way in. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Nakamura. Sorry, thank you for your patience. Please continue.
Before coming to CU, I had been a Japanese language professor at Berkeley. But on February 19th, 1942, our President Roosevelt made an executive order requiring all Japanese Americans on the West Coast be placed in what they called relocation centers. I had the option of staying at one of these camps or teaching at CU.
That's Susumu Nakamura, chief instructor at the Japanese language school at CU in 1943. I really wish we had time to go into this. Maybe we can at least touch on this because I didn't know it till I started my research, but CU had a Japanese language school from 1942 to 1946.
We here at the Navy consider the Japanese language program at CU a wartime secret weapon.
And they recruited professors to work there from the camps. There was even an internment camp in Colorado called Amache.
It housed 7,800 Japanese behind barbed wire fences.
And in the barracks at Amache, there was no insulation.
Dirt floors.
And I'm reading about this in the winter.
The internees were allowed to bring one bag.
Working for the language program at CU is one way you can serve your country.
It also allowed Japanese Americans to get themselves and their immediate family out of the internment camps.
But my wife's parents, my sister's brothers, my uncles, aunts, friends had to remain in the camps. One of my fellow instructors could not even bring his parents because they were not American citizens. And he was so worried. His father had had a stroke.
Oh, I really wish we had time to go into this because there's this fascinating MA thesis by a guy named Donald Irish.
In 1950, Donald Irish wrote an MA thesis at CU on
the reactions of residents of Boulder, Colorado to the introduction of Japanese into the community.
As part of his thesis, he interviewed
267 Boulder Caucasians, and there were some things that the residents I interviewed were in general agreement on. For example, that there was discrimination in housing.
Whoa, before you go any further with that statement, as a member of the Boulder Real Estate Board, I would like to clarify that there was never any official policy concerning Japanese Americans announced by the board.
But, Tim, there was how should I say it? A gentleman's agreement not to sell property to Japanese Americans.
Personally, I wouldn't sell to a Japanese American. I mean, real estate boards have ethics, and it would be unethical to sell to them. Like putting junkyards in the nice part of town. I mean, we have zoning regulations for such problems.
But in general, there were conflicting perspectives of Boulder Caucasians on many, many subjects. For example, 164 of the 267 that I interviewed said that they didn't think there were any unpleasant incidents in Boulder concerning Japanese Americans.
They were treated very nicely. We were too friendly, perhaps.
Boulder tried to help.
Boulder went out of its way to help.
Oh, it was a fortunate place for Japanese Americans.
Came and went like ordinary people.
Boulder gave them every advantage.
Almost offended them.
You know, too much room given.
But we were fed up with them in the end.
If there were incidents, they were not more than with others. One doesn't know and is dubious about.
But 111 of the 267 interviewed, they either indicated a vague yes.
My memory is that there were some incidents. Yes, I can't recall, but yes, there were some.
Or they began to actually tell me specific stories.
A teacher was asked to leave a cafe because Japs were not welcome there.
They were treated very nicely.
We were too friendly, perhaps.
A Japanese American boy suffered an attack of appendicitis in the middle of the night, and the town doctors refused to come. They finally had to call a Navy doctor.
Boulder tried to help.
Boulder went out of its way to help.
Japanese instructors were shot at numerous times with air rifles.
Oh, it was a fortunate place for Japanese Americans.
Came and went like ordinary people.
A Japanese American girl was raped by a white boy.
Boulder gave them every advantage.
Almost offended them.
The Japanese American wanted to open a shoe shop, actually go into business in Boulder, but the Legionnaires wouldn't rent to him.
You know, too much room given.
But we were fed up with them in the end.
The bus driver stopped the bus dead when an old Japanese was walking up the aisle. Conductor got a big laugh.
I caught. Okay, thank you, Slide. We have to move on. Thank you.
The Negroes of Boulder County. A community analysis of an ethnic minority group, CU Thesis 1947.
Boulder, racially, is in a very fortunate position. It has been discovered that racial conflicts are at a minimum whenever there are very few of any racial minority in the community. The white people of Boulder accept the Negroes without much antagonism. It is questionable how the whites would act if there was a large influx of Negroes. Also, the Negroes of Boulder are not belligerent and set a fine example of how any racial minority should act. Boulder will never have a real Negro problem.
Cut. I had to take this section out yesterday because of time. The story's too similar to the CU thesis on the Japanese.
Actually, it's quite different. How about at least talking about the segregation of the black community into the Goss Grove neighborhood and the struggle for that black community to grow when it was almost impossible to buy property outside of the Little Triangle?
Yes, historian Dan Corson wrote an important paper on this, but I chose to go with the KKK in Boulder. Slide.
That's minutes from a Boulder City Council meeting in 1932, asking for $312 to send unemployed Mexicans and their families living in Boulder back to Mexico.
But I was born in Boulder. I've been here for 25 years. Hey, I've never even been to Mexico!
What?
The story of immigrant labor in Boulder County is very complicated, but maybe we can at least look at the beat laborers. Slide.
It was the custom to waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning and arriving at the fields by fierce light. I would walk in the furrow between rows, hoeing, and clearing 2 at a time. I would continue this pace until well past dark, lighting my way with a lamp mounted on a miner's cap.
You cannot treat these German Russians as people that you would have about the place. For if you tried, it wouldn't be 30 days before you were living in their shack and they were driving your Ford.
I'm confused. What was that?
That's from a local farmer's article entitled Does beat labor respond to good treatment? It was written in 1918 complaining that German-Russian laborers were climbing the economic ladder in the county.
But that slide is actually of a Mexican family of beat workers.
Me acostumbré a levantarme a las 3 de la mañana. Llegaba a las granjas por primera luz. Caminaba entre las filas, escarbando y limpiando dos al mismo tiempo hasta que se oscurezca, con una lámpara en mi casco.
Mexicans were not any more welcome as permanent residents of Boulder County than the German Russians who preceded them. To the white farmers, they were all Mexican immigrants, no matter that some of their ancestors had settled in the Southwest more than 400 years earlier.
During wartime, when they needed votes, white people called me American. If I needed a loan, I'm Spanish. And if I apply for a job, I'm Mexican.
In northern Colorado during the 1920s, it was not uncommon to see signs posted in public places stating, "We cater to white trade only," or "No dogs or Mexicans allowed."
I would arrive home by 10 p.m. each night to get a few short hours of sleep before repeating the whole routine all over again.
Llegaba a casa a las 10 cada noche. Dormí un par de horas y repetía la misma rutina otra vez.
I was accustomed to waking up at 3 a.m. every morning. I walked to the beach fields just as first light was illuminating the beach front.
That's Miss Mui Nishida working for the Great Western Sugar Beet Company near Longmont.
What about the Chinese?
Good question. But what to focus on when it comes to cycles of exploitation and immigration? I mean, industry pursues immigrant labor to grow the economy, and then growth slows down and we no longer need them. Here comes the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Asian Immigration Act, the Filipino Repatriation Act, the Mexican Repatriation Act.
Exactly. Let's turn to Phil Gustein's book, page 174, in 1870.
Hold it. You want to go back to 1870, a third of the way through Act 2?
In 1870, the territorial legislature of Colorado adopted a resolution encouraging the immigration of cheap Chinese laborers in order to
hasten the development and early prosperity of the region.
In 1880, there were 1,002 Chinese residents in Colorado, about 60% in Denver. European miners protested the presence of the Chinese in Netherlands in March of 1874.
Chinese immigration is the greatest curse ever visited upon our countrymen.
We cannot tolerate these copper-colored leeches.
For the sake of the working man in Colorado,
the Chinese must go.
Corporate Colorado boldly replied,
Chinese labor is necessary to ensure profits and growth.
The leaders of these law enforcement squads in Netherlands promised to shoot any European miner protesting the loss of their jobs to the Chinese.
I really should say, kind of focusing on Boulder, there weren't any Chinese workers to speak of. We were a supply town.
On October 30th, 1880, the Democrats sponsored a torchlight parade in Denver to build enthusiasm for their candidates. 12 hours later, a mob of 5,000, that's about 10% of Denver's total population, were out on the streets yelling, "Death to the Chinese!"
Death to the Chinese!
Burning and looting Chinese businesses. They listingly ran a laundry at 19th and Lawrence.
Death to the Chinese! 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 Death to the Chinese!
The perpetrators are acquitted.
Get your papers, get your papers. Chinatown, a mass ruin. The Chinese are gone. The Chinese are gone.
By 1910, there were only 373 Chinese in the entire state.
Research, what is that image? I think you were right to include the Chinese section. I think it was important. Thank you. Now, what is that?
That's the Women's Christian Temperance Union in Chautauqua in 1915. And I do think this is a very good time to deal with information.
Yes. I will try. One of the confusing things about dealing with Boulder history is the complicated way that race and class intersect in our community.
In 1903, the Boulder City Improvement Association organized to pursue the improvement of Boulder in
health, growth, cleanliness, prosperity, and attractiveness.
As a first step, the association sought to create a park around Chautauqua and to acquire and develop other parklands. The association retained America's premier landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., to come up with a master plan for the city's parks.
The Olmsteds were terribly elitist. Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. designed Central Park in New York, and he was hired by the state of California in the 1860s to do a master plan for Yosemite. And there's this statement by him that I read, that the beauty was so sublime that the working person couldn't appreciate it, so we're going to plan it for the wealthy. When his son Frederick Jr. came to Boulder in 1908, what's now the lawn area between the library and the municipal building, there along Canyon, was a big shanty town called the Jungle. And anybody could live there. It was like a big homeless shelter.
So many themes in Boulder's history are still the themes today.
That's a picture of it.
1908.
And Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. said, you've got to get rid of this disreputable group of people. This creek is an amenity. You need to start buying up the land and creating a Boulder Creek Park.
Stroll or sit on a warm day beneath clean stem trees through which the breeze may freely draw. To feel their canopy protecting the eye from the glare. To look out upon an open space bathed in brilliant sunshine is to taste one of the highest charms, the wonderful climate with which Boulder is blessed.
So the city went in there and bulldozed it, and all these people had no place to live. It's not like the homeless have ever been welcomed anywhere, but what's unique is that Boulder, as a result of its land use planning, did it. Boulder got rid of its homeless so that its citizens would have a pleasant place to walk.
Our object in all cases is to achieve order. We aim at order and hope for beauty.
I'm actually editing this book right now, and one of the contributors is writing an article on Boulder's open space policies and how those open space policies started off as this utopian vision of the perfect city and have instead created a very narrow utopia for very few people. It's a white upper middle class utopia and a nightmare to everyone else.
It was illegal to carry a lunch pail on Pearl Street in the 1920s.
Actually, that was just folklore. It wasn't a real ordinance.
But what this legend does indicate is a perceived negative attitude towards wage earners at the time. Coal miners from the area, Longmont, Lafayette, Louisville, said that they were treated poorly in Boulder. In the oral histories, a coal miner complained that there was one Boulder store that actually had a policy of not waiting on miners from Lafayette. Now, some of this, they were ignored in the stores, wouldn't be waited on, that sort of thing. I don't know how objective it is. These folks probably had biases against Boulder.
The coal miners' complaints that Dan referred to inspired me to go back to the Carnegie Library's oral history archives and see what else they had to say. This is Richard Brown from Lafayette.
Well, you see, you had your little lunch bucket, and you had your water in the bottom, and you had your lunch in the middle, and then you had your pie on the top. Now, you ate your pie when you went down into the mine, so, you know, if you got killed, you had your pie.
Over 1,700 miners died in Colorado from 1884 to 1912. 1 in 46 men died in the mines in 1910 alone.
Lawrence Amacarella of Lafayette.
The accidents here didn't mean nothing. And that these people care more about a mule. One time, the mule I was driving got his foot caught in a switch. These folks felt so sorry for the mule, they cried. But if I got killed, nobody would have said a word.
We love stories about animals.
Cave-ins and explosions in Colorado were twice the national average and 4 times as dangerous as those in states where the United Mine Workers represented most miners.
You know, Almost all of the old coal towns that I know about have different ethnic parts of town. Louisville, Lafayette. This was sort of deliberate on the part of the company because if, say, the English and the Welsh went out on strike, then they'd bring in scab laborers of probably Italian or Greek, so that there was a language barrier, so that they couldn't get together and do something.
Major strikes shook Boulder County in 1898, 1903, 1910 to 1914, and 1927. In most disputes, mine owners persuaded the Colorado governor to send in state and federal troops to defend their mine property and their scabs. The bloodiest strike in Colorado's northern coalfield was in 1927 at the Columbine Mine near Lafayette and Canfield.
John James, also of Lafayette.
95% of the people who worked in the mines came out on strike. We used to get up at 4 in the morning at the sound of the trumpet so that we could get out on the picket line.
The striking miners shut down every one of the coal mines in northern Colorado except the Columbine Mine. After 5 weeks of strike action and economic stagnation, the mine owners of Columbine became increasingly desperate to find a way to end the strike quickly, and many more police and National Guardsmen were drafted, bringing with them weapons, including several machine guns.
Now that the National Guard has been sent into the field, Colorado looks to an early termination of the coal strike. Colorado must have coal.
Denver Post editorial.
On November 21st, 1927, we went down to the Columbine Mine to march around the camp with the American flag. But when we tried to go through the fence, they had it electrified.
I warned the marchers I saw that there was a machine gun nest underneath the water tank. Well, they didn't care. They said they couldn't shoot the American flag.
Popular strike leader Adam Bell stepped forward.
Unlock this gate!
As he put his hand on the gate, one of the rangers struck him with a club. Another tried to grab away a flag from a miner's son that stood nearby. And in the tug-of-war that followed, the flagpole broke over the fence. The miners rushed.
We crawl under a fence and head up the road to a tank where they get their water from. That's when they began throwing tear gas. We were told not to even carry a knife, so that they can't say that we started the trouble.
Machine guns are the best answer to the picketers. Posted in Columbine Mine, willing workers work, while picketers slink back. Machine guns manned by willing shooters are wanted at other Colorado mines.
Editorial in the Boulder Daily Camera, November 17th, 1927.
That's 4 days before the attack.
As we approached the water tank, we saw all the machine guns lined up for action. Then Captain White gave the order to aim. All the miners started to run back, and he said,
"Fire!"
That's John Estenis. He lives down the street from me. Married. 6 kids. Little older than me, maybe 34. And that's Nick Stanidakis, also of Lafayette. It's funny they should be together. They always fought. And him, I don't really know him. I think his name is Kovich. Pretty sure he's from Erie. And that's Rene Jacques of Louisville. I don't know what his family is going to do. He's been the main support since the father was injured in a mining accident last year. And that's Jerry. Jerry Davis. Couldn't have been more than 20, 21. He didn't die out here. He was a couple of hours later in the hospital. They gave his mother the American flag he was wearing. It had 17 bullet holes in it. 17! All stained with blood. And not just his. Lots of flags had bullet holes in them. You see, we would throw the flag over the injured, hoping that would stop them. But they would beat the injured that were lying under the flag with the butts of their guns. The American flag did not mean anything to the so-called National Guard!
When I was doing my research, I read about an interesting anecdote about the Ludlow Massacre Memorial out in southern Colorado. An archaeologist working at the massacre site was approached by some tourists that had seen the mile marker for the massacre on the highway.
I'm confused. I thought that this was an Indian massacre site.
No, it's the largest massacre of striking miners in the United States. The National Guard set fire to the miners' tents, killing 2 women and 13 children.
Not Indians?
No, American labor, whose leaders were assassinated by the militia leader.
That's him.
Who claimed he was a Jesus Christ and that his word was law.
Not Indians?
No, American workers. And the National Guard dismissed the deaths as a bunch of Greeks.
I like Indians.
Foreigners. Ah!
When Rockefeller Jr. was asked by the Congressional Investigating Committee how much his striking miners were paid at Ludlow, the rent the company charged them for their houses, the mortality rate of miners in his mines, he said,
I haven't the slightest idea. No idea. No idea. No idea.
That's a slide of Columbine miners from the Lafayette Miners Museum.
After the guns at Columbine stopped, the sheriff come in and arrested me. They let me loose the second day, but I couldn't get a job back after. They said there's no work for you because you're a communist.
So yeah, there's always been this excuse me, there's always been this hostility towards unions. The miners and working people in general have never been, in terms of marketing, they've never been the kind of audience that Boulder has cared to attract.
Water?
Thank you. So yeah, Boulder has this time-honored tradition of intolerance of socioeconomic diversity. And they create this wonderful subterfuge by embracing ethnic and gender diversity to hide that. It's a lot of image.
Image, you guys, she said image. Places, please, places, history, we want to celebrate, take 3. Thank you for your speed. History, we want to celebrate, take 3.
History we want to celebrate, we want to talk about American Indians and essentialize them, to see them as noble people who somehow just went away.
Mestizaje originally referred to the mix of Amerindian and European ancestry, which makes up most of the Latin American population.
And right next to that is this real celebration of pioneers, those settlers who came here first.
This next story happened in the University Hill neighborhood in the 1980s.
People love stories about animals, especially animals like bison, big animals, cougars, elk, lynx, even though those animals in themselves create a lot of ambivalence.
Hey, excuse me, police. Police. Yes, there's a Mexican man lurking around my neighborhood.
Is he doing anything suspicious?
I told you! He's Mexican!
You know, what do you do when there's a cougar walking right down your main street? Or what do you do when the elk have taken up residence in your backyard?
All right, cut.
Cut.
That's a take.
Take.
This incident raised quite a flurry of letters to the editor, that there was this assumption that because there was an Hispanic in a neighborhood in which the houses began at $500,000, that somehow this person must be up to no good. So is that racism or is that elitism? Or is it racism as a result of the elitism? I don't think it's racism in the classic definition of one group being inferior in some way. I think it's just change in demographics brought that about. I mean, I live in a neighborhood now in which we're in the minority in terms of our socioeconomic class. Only one other household in the neighborhood works for a living. It's just changed so much. And the only Hispanics you see are there to clean other people's houses.
Anything else?
No, thank you. I need to go or I'm going to miss my bus to work.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure, I hope it helps.
Thank you.
Hello?
The issues of karma are so complex. Focus on what's the most skillful thing we can do now, given the situation. That's where the emphasis should lie. Keep that in mind, because the principles of karma, the laws of karma, are not traffic laws that apply only in certain places, only at certain times, 4:30 to 6 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that kind of thing. Karma is a law that applies to all of our actions 24/7. So we want to remind ourselves to be skillful at all times. No matter what the situation, no matter how minor or major it may seem, we've got the opportunity to do good, to act on skillful intentions. Not just good intentions, but intentions that are skillful as well. That requires work. It requires training. This is what we're doing right here. It's important to keep that in mind at all times, no matter how ordinary or extraordinary the situation is. What you're doing right now is important. So be careful what you do.
I did call Dan Corson with questions, and he continued to be very helpful. He sent me an article that came out in the Boulder Weekly. It was called Segregation Boulder Style. And in it, Wayne Laugesen writes about an interview he had in 1993 with Thomas Robb, then head of the Ku Klux Klan.
Ku Klux Klan leader Thomas Robb nailed it in '93 when he told me.
Boulder has done everything right.
He explained that by zoning and planning, complete with growth caps, Boulder had made itself inhospitable to the working class minority.
Who reproduce.
If more communities would plan and zone and use municipal law
to exclude,
Rob explained, then more of them would be predominantly white like Boulder.
Hey, Boulder is the only place I feel safe without a bulletproof vest.
Rob didn't care about the city's intent, but he loved the results. To his delight, the upper classes are mostly white.
Quit apologizing for it. It is natural for whites to want to live among other whites. What you're doing in Boulder is good and natural.
In the 1924 election, the Ku Klux Klan carried Colorado's 13 county legislatures and judicial offices. Colorado sent a U.S. senator to Washington on Klan money. The mayor of Denver, Benjamin Stapleton, was Klan. At one time, Boulder's Colorado Clavern claimed 2,000 Boulder County members. The heavy Klan voter turnout in Boulder and Larimer counties was thought key to the election of a Klan governor in Colorado.
This slide is of a 1922 rally where the Boulder Clavern No. 3 initiated 200 new Boulder Klansmen.
So the KKK really did resonate in the West. That's why it gets to be such a powerful organization here, one of the more powerful.
The star Colorado recruit, the man who would make the Colorado Klan second in power and per capita membership only to the Indiana Klan, was a homeopathic physician named John Galen Locke, whose Klan battle cry was
100% Americanism!
The people who sent the most Klan candidates to Washington were like Indiana, Oregon, Colorado, Pennsylvania. That's not exactly Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama. That's not in the South.
So, Judy, why did the KKK take off in the West?
Most of the native-born
Excuse me.
Most of the native-born Euro-Americans before the Civil War were from Northern and Western Europe. They were Welsh, French, Irish, Scandinavian, maybe German. They very easily assimilated into American culture.
100% Americanism!
After about
1870, those immigrants trickle off, and the new immigrants coming in are from Southern and Eastern Europe. Now, these people eat strange foods, like garlic and smoked salmon. Very strange to the native-born people. They have a different language. They are Jewish or Catholic, they're not Protestant. They don't assimilate very well. They don't have the same skills, education level, or money that the earlier immigrants had. They seem very different.
100% Americanism!
So that's what brings the KKK up, and that's what takes it out of the South. The KKK now is not just focused on blacks, it's focused on what people see as an un-American trend.
The following is an excerpt from a Denver newspaper ad recruiting Klan found in Phil Goodstein's book In the Shadow of the Klan, when the KKK ruled Denver 1920 to 1926.
Post-Civil War Klansmen fought to destroy a bad local government.
Yes.
The Klansmen of today are fighting to preserve a good one.
Yes.
And how do you think that can be done? By maintaining a Christian civilization in America. If the Klan aspires to purify America and make her impregnable, it is not for any selfish reason. It is in order that America, pure and impregnable, may extend a giant helping hand to peoples less fortunate. How are purity and impregnability to be realized? Our people must be of the right composition.
Yes.
The stuff which they are made of must be sound, or they cannot vindicate the American social and political experiment. Free education.
Yes.
Free speech.
Yes.
Free press, separation of church and state, white supremacy, just laws, the pursuit of happiness. All these each Klansman swears to seal with his blood. If you are native-born white, Gentile, Protestant American, and if your record can stand the acid test of our thorough investigation, we want you. If for any reason whatever you cannot qualify, do not waste your time and ours. You cannot get by unless you are
100% Americanism!
Tom Noah and Don Corson write, an ungodly number of sheets and pillowcases were hung out to dry on Mondays in Boulder after weekend rallies on Flagstaff Mountain.
Flagstaff Mountain, that is where the Boulder Klan had installed a giant 50-foot high cross in 1924 and did regular burnings.
In the 1920s, there were around 160 African Americans in Boulder County, 75 Jews, and no synagogues. The target of the KKK in Boulder was Catholic immigrants, particularly Irish and Italian, as well as Mexican Catholics.
We stopped speaking Spanish in public and ordering tortillas.
They used to ride into Louisville on horseback with flares, and this poor old ethnic European woman would rush to the cellars, scared to death. It was terrible.
We didn't go out for fish on Fridays, and we took our children out of parochial schools to protect them.
The governor of Colorado in August of 1924, Governor Sweet, tried to stop the spread of Klan in the state.
I am unreservedly opposed to the Klan's efforts to secure political power by capitalizing on religious prejudice and race hatred. If we followed the Klan's advice, we would soon all be 200% American and hate everybody.
Yes, he soon lost that election to one of my candidates.
Which I'm very embarrassed to say his last name was Morley. Governor Clarence Morley, no relation.
Governor Morley demanded that the president of CU, George Norland, fire all Catholic and Jewish professors and staff or lose state funding. But Norland...
I stated flatly to the governor that if CU had to pay such a price for the support of the legislature, we preferred to do without that support. And we did without it.
That's an image of the state's first Klan paper, the Rocky Mountain American.
It is launched 3 months after Morley's election by a local Boulder resident of the name William Francis.
My grandfather, August Mativi, an Italian immigrant, had a cross burned in his front yard in Denver because he was Catholic, and he dared to buy the entire block he lived on in Denver. It was a threat to the white elite that he would buy that much property.
I would rather be a Klansman in robe of snowy white than to be a Catholic priest in robe as black as night. For a Klansman is American, and America is his home. But a priest owes his allegiance to a Dago Pope in Rome.
Rocky Mountain American, April 24th, 1925.
The first wave of immigrants that were from Southern and Eastern Europe who were Catholic or Jewish really struggled against discrimination. That was my grandfather's generation.
The greatest damage done to Catholics in Denver by the Klan was the boycott of Catholic businesses.
Their children work really hard to prove that they're good Americans.
100% Americanism!
That was very much my father. My grandfather, a ditch digger, sent my father to the best schools in Denver, and my father is a very successful businessman, but he doesn't stay in the ethnic neighborhoods of Denver. He gets the heck out of North Denver, which is the old Italian neighborhood.
KKK businesses sold cigars labeled CYANA, an acronym for
Catholics. You are not Americans!
And this is an article from the same paper explaining the importance of the KKK to Boulder.
And I grew up in Wheat Ridge, out in the suburbs, so by the time I came along, I just felt, I just thought of myself as an American.
100% Americanism!
That was very much the trend throughout American history.
This is an ad in the Rocky Mountain American for JCPenney's, February 20th, 1925. Some of the JCPenney's ads were for Klan sheets.
Get your wizard sheets, get your wizard sheets, only 99 cents. And wizard pillowcases are only a quarter.
In the 1948 Register, Monsignor Smith reflected back on the Klan's campaign against Catholics in the 20s. He said,
"Ultimately, we Catholics on the whole suffered little from the Klan, although great harm was planned against us.
The Negroes of Denver, on the other hand, suffered much because the Klan committees went from door to door, demanding that business owners drop colored employees."
In the 1920s, the new immigrants were very foreign. Their children in the 50s move out into the suburbs and gain respectability. Their children by the 70s and 80s, it isn't even a question, they've completely assimilated.
from 1910 to 1950, the white population of Boulder goes from 9,539 up to 19,999.
That's up more than 10,000 white residents.
During that same time period, the black population in Boulder went from 166 down to 113.
And now Boulder has an even smaller percentage of black to white residents than it did in 1920.
A lot of times when people talk about racism in the US, they get very defensive. They see it as an accusation. They say like, I'm not a Klan member, I don't do that. And that's absolutely true. I am very grateful that they're not Klan members. That's how low the bar is set. But it still seems like you have a hard time seeing structures of discrimination. To me, the racism is quite structural, and yet there's still a perception that affirmative action is a gimme, getting things that people don't deserve, and that's a very strong perception. Not just in Boulder, but it's just out in society more generally. I do think it comes back in some ways to some of the issues we've discussed about having a hard time seeing historical phenomena.
Now, my daughter, she wants to learn how to make raviolis. She loves polenta. She's mad at me because I didn't keep my grandmother's old hand-cranked pasta maker. So I think it's coming full circle now where we're children these days where there's no question they're American.
100% American.
I mean, my daughter's last name is Morley. She's blonde with green eyes, and now she wants her Italian heritage. Where my father's generation, my grandfather's, and even a little bit of mine, we had to disassociate enough in order to be looked on as white.
Judy, you were once black.
My grandfather, on his immigration papers in 1919, was designated as black. Yeah, he was swarthy, you know, he was Italian.
And now you're white.
Yeah, now I'm white. And my father was white too, you know.
And your father was white, but your grandfather was black.
Yeah, my grandfather was still black, which is funny, you know, because he's about as white as I am, maybe even more so.
As late as the 1940s, the University of Colorado would not permit black students in their dormitories. And the restaurants on the Hill were not to serve anyone black unless in the company of a white.
I hate to cut this short, but I have a 2:15 appointment with a surgeon for my daughter, and then we're off to the rodeo.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Good luck on your project.
Thank you.
The situation of various groups in the country today makes me personally very upset when people talk about that affirmative action is over because they say slavery's over. But that is actually a national scar. That's something that's there. It's not going away. It's a scar. It's scar tissue. It's part of the body politic. And that's something, it doesn't matter if you immigrated yesterday or if you've been an old family that's been here for 300, 400 years, or American Indian in a way. That's something that's going to be part of how you relate to this country.
Cut.
Well, I have a 2 o'clock meeting.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you speaking with me.
I love history. It was a pleasure.
You know, this is a picture of Andrew Sterling and talking about how he was attacked on June 3rd, 2005. Places, you guys, final one, place in history we want to celebrate. History we want to celebrate, take 4. History we want to celebrate, take 4.
This is history in its nearness. The last rings right below the bark and the cut line of the saw. These are some of the hate crimes that have happened in Boulder in the last few years. I should add that when the Boulder Bias Hotline opened, it had 52 reported incidents within the first 6 months.
Anti-Croatian harassment. A Croatian man who speaks with a noticeable accent complained to the police that his family had been harassed over the last 2 years by teenage boys in the neighborhood. Knives thrown at their porch, used condoms in their mailbox, and even trying to run them down with their car. Anti-African assault. A Nigerian national and a Saudi Arabian national were exiting a bar when 3 white males approached them. They started yelling at the 2 men, "Get out of my country, blank. This is Boulder, you don't belong here. Get out of my city." They only referred to the Nigerian as a blank or blank. The Saudi man attempted to defuse the situation by telling the male something to the effect of, "Give the country back to the Indians." The 3 white males became increasingly agitated and aggressive at this remark, using racist and white supremacist language, and then punched the Nigerian man in the face, knocking him to the concrete. Anti-Asian harassment. The male voice in the message was advising that he wanted to rape her, that she would bleed to death and her female organs would be ripped out. He advised that he wanted to have sex with her because he had never had sex with an Asian and wanted to add it to his list.
Cut on the hate crimes, please. The majority of people of color in the community that I spoke with had not been physically attacked, but they spoke of what Polly McLean referred to as microabrasions.
Like the time I went to speak with my son's first grade teacher because I was concerned that he couldn't read. She told me not to worry, that he was the fastest runner in the class. The fastest runner. What does that have to do with anything? My other son read by the time he was 2.
After moving here from Texas, my wife and I enrolled our daughter into elementary school. After about a week, we realized that she was put into special ed. When we asked her teacher why, she said that it was her experience that children like her, brown, came from Texas and Florida, were often too far behind their peers to catch up. She understood that we as parents probably didn't have the education to help her advance. Our children are extremely intelligent. We are very well educated.
It was a couple of days after the election, and the storekeeper comes up to me and says, "Hey, isn't it great that Obama got elected?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'd had a rough day. My granddaughter and I had been followed around a store on Pearl Street, like we were going to steal something." And she says, "You must be mistaken. I know the owner of that store, and she would never allow an employee to follow someone around just because she was black. In other words, I must be imagining things like I'm crazy. You know when you're being followed, when someone is peering at you."
So I start to make a presentation to the committee on racism in one of the departments. And the director says, "There you go, bringing up racism again." They hired me as their diversity coordinator.
So, I'm on the road with my friend, and she's white, I'm black. And we stop at a motel because it's late at night, and I volunteer to go in and get the room, and the woman behind the counter looks at me and says, there's no room for you here. It smelled fishy, so I walked back out to the car, and we drove away, came back 20 minutes later, and this time my friend went in, and sure enough, she got a room.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Are we going to get to the new future section soon?
I certainly hope so.
Hello?
The issues of karma are so complex. So do your best to head your mind in the direction of more and more skillfulness. Otherwise, this samsara, this wandering around that we do, is pretty aimless. The image the Buddha gives is of throwing a stick up in the air. Sometimes it falls on this end, sometimes it falls on the other end, sometimes it falls flat, all pretty random, pretty aimless. Try to turn your life from being a stick thrown up into the air into an arrow, shooting in a particular direction, toward the direction of more and more skillfulness. Ultimately, someday, whether it's in this lifetime or the next, the arrow will reach its target, but only if you focus on this issue of skillfulness right here and right now, and keep it right here, right now. Every right here and right now. That's what builds up the momentum. That's what gives direction and meaning to your life.
There's this moment early on when I was first doing research for this performance. I read about the Arapaho Chief Niwot running towards the soldiers, his hands outstretched in a sign of peace, and he is gunned down. And I want to fly back through history and say, stop! Stop! But I can't. I can't stop the bullets from entering Niwot's body. He goes down. But I can keep up his momentum. I can keep moving forward. Niwot set his life in a particular direction, like an arrow towards its target. He was skillful, learning multiple languages, learning how to talk to so many different people and really listen across difference. I can continue that direction and send the arrow on. It may not reach its target during my lifetime,